Hi, everyone. This is your host, Annie Zhang, and this is Hello, Metaverse. The number of successful consumer applications in the Web3 space is still few and far between. But against all odds, Audius, which is an open source and decentralized music discovery and community platform, was somehow able to strike a chord and gain mainstream adoption. They have racked up 7 million monthly listeners and 50,000 artists, including heavy hitters like deadmau5, Nas, Chainsmokers, Steve Aoki, and many more. So what exactly is Audius and how were they able to gain so much traction? Well, when you initially check out their website, Audius looks just like any other Web2 music discovery and streaming product, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath that, all data on Audius is open source, which means that if you're a developer and you want to take the music library and build your own unique music application, you can do that. Now, why does that matter? Well, the creative possibilities are endless. One fun example is someone who actually built a car racing game where you need to steer the car to the beat of the music. Pretty cool, huh? Beyond that, listener data is open as well, which means that artists can have unfettered access to their fan base and use it like a CRM. They can create fan clubs, share exclusive streams, but more fundamentally, even if a platform like Spotify or Soundcloud goes down or changes their algorithms, they will still be able to have a direct channel to their listeners. Finally, the governance structure of Audius's community is also extremely unique and robust. Audius, the startup, is actually just one small piece of the entire ecosystem. There is also an Audius token, which is managed by the Audius Foundation, and that stimulates the economic activities and incentives of the ecosystem. Furthermore, contribution and decision-making to the platform is all done by the community in a decentralized manner. Roneil, Rumberg, the co-founder and CEO of Audius, is the brains behind this entire operation. And in our conversation, we deep dive into the intricacies of the platform, and he also provides a fascinating view to how future consumer Web3 products might be operated and run. Now here is my conversation with Roneil Rumberg. Hey, Roneil, I'm so excited to have you here. What I'm particularly excited to talk about is the fact that you have created a really successful example of a Web3 consumer product. And, all of the business models and consumer value prop that's associated with it is extremely robust. And so I think with this interview, we're really going to be able to help other founders who want to get into the Web3 consumer space get a lot of really interesting insights to model after. Anyways, so to start, let's kind of start with the problem that you've been trying to tackle, which is the music industry, right? The music industry is notoriously hard to deal with and has extremely outdated models. But what was the specific problems that you sought out to solve?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of an overview of the industry today and then can give you our angle that we first started learning about these things. But from a 30,000 foot view, music's about a $42 billion a year industry. That's recorded music, live, merch, everything, whole shebang, which is surprisingly small in proportion to the cultural impact of the space, but that's a whole conversation for another day. Of that $42 billion, though, only 12% of it makes it to artists on an annual basis. The other 88% is actually going to various intermediaries, middlemen, middlewomen, etc. Everyone is sitting in between the artist and the fan. And that's kind of where Audius comes into the picture. So Audius is a music discovery and community platform that connects artists and fans directly. And because Audius is fully decentralized, the level of that directness really here is not something that's been tested or done before, which is there's no company even running the platform, right? The platform itself is an amalgamation of user-owned and user-operated tools that are allowing these creators to kind of in a scalable fashion build a fan base, access that fan base, monetize that fan base more effectively. But that's all kind of where Audius is at today. Rewinding back to what angle we approach this problem from and how we came at this, it was really just my co-founder Forrest and I were very into and enjoyed dance music. We listened to a lot of dance music, went out to a lot of shows, and started to become friends with some of these producers, especially on the aspiring side. And there was just this broad disenchantment with SoundCloud at the time, and a sentiment among the community that SoundCloud didn't have their back. SoundCloud kept making decisions that were kind of misaligned with what was best for that community and what could be done to advance the goals of those grassroots up and coming creators. And the thesis for Audius coming out of that was really just that you could create a commons for music distribution and for fan engagement that was owned and operated by the very users that make it valuable, rather than by a profit-seeking corporation that's trying to extract value from that, what really should be a common good. You could be resilient to making these sorts of poor decisions and heading a direction that was kind of antithetical to what the community's needs were. So yeah, that's really where things began. I think our naivety towards a lot of the complexity of how broadly music works and everything else ended up helping us early on, just because I think if we had tried to encapsulate all of that in V0 of Audius, we probably never would have shipped a product, right? And never would have gotten off the ground. But it's been a wild 4 years or so since then. And today Audius serves about 7 million fans on a monthly basis and around 250,000 artists. So it's still early for us, but it's been really, really humbling and exciting to see the community's sort of embrace of this new way of doing things.
That's incredible. And I think your naivete really helped with the outcome, because 7 million listeners is an insane amount of listeners for music products. So let's actually dive into the product. So for someone who does not know Audius, is not familiar with it, can you talk about all of the different sides of the platform? So the consumer experience, the creator experience, and then maybe as a contributor, what is their experience on the platform?
Yeah, so there are really three constituent audiences around Audius. As you mentioned, the listeners, creators of content or uploaders of content, and then the so-called node operators, the people who actually run the infrastructure that hosts all this content and keeps the network functional. So the usage model from the user's perspective, be that user an artist or a listener, is pretty familiar when they're looking at it from the lens of how they expect other music products to work. You can, on audius.co, the website, or download the mobile app, you can make an account using just a username and password. The product behind the scenes is actually creating a wallet for you and securing that wallet with your username and password. But the users don't have to be knowledgeable about how that's working. They just get to sign in with a username and password across their devices like they're used to. You can upload content to Audius by just clicking the upload button, dragging your content in on desktop web, and filling in some metadata. So it's no different from uploading to YouTube or SoundCloud or any of those types of things from a user experience perspective. From the listener side, same story, right? So you can go on to Audius, create an account, follow artists that you enjoy music from. You get this feed structure that shows you what they're posting in real time, and then also what the people you follow are reposting, favoriting, and kind of broadly engaging with on the network. That's kind of the base usage model. From there, though, where things get a lot more interesting is when artists start to fall down that rabbit hole of like, oh, what else can I do with this tool, and what else can I do with, where that onion starts to peel back first is around these NFT native features. You can curate your NFT collection on your profile, and if people click through those NFTs, they can actually can link those to OpenSea or to other marketplaces where they could buy and sell them. There are some cool new features coming down the pipe around NFT related engagement as well over the next couple of months, but you can start to see things go a little bit deeper. I think what's been most interesting to us as the initial builders of this ecosystem has been what creators have come up with to do with these tools that we never anticipated or thought about. I think one of the best examples of that was an artist on Audius named Lido ran a remix competition. He just threw up a track and then threw up all the stems that went into that track as separate tracks, because Audius didn't have any structure to let you aggregate those things in one place. He posted on Instagram to his fans and said, hey, anyone can remix this, do whatever they want with it, tag what you upload as, hashtag Lido remix. And like next week I'll go on IG IG Live and live stream myself listening to and reacting to these. Ended up getting a ton of great submissions. I think the live stream he did, it was like 4 or 5 hours long. It just took forever to review all of them. And when we see users doing things like that, our product team, the folks in the broader Audius ecosystem that work on product, ask themselves, oh, like this is a really cool emergent use case. Like, what could we do to make that easier, make that better, right? There are a number of situations where that kind of thing has come up. But yeah, hopefully this gives you all some sense of what that base engagement model or usage model around Audius looks like. It's just a fun way to share cool, different music with your community and to engage them in different ways, be it through these remix competitions, by distributing NFTs to them, and on and on.
Yeah, I think there's so much more to delve deeper on. So I want to talk more about the problems that it's solving for artists and why they can't actually do it on other platforms. You know, you've kind of called this almost like a CRM for artists and their fan base, right? What does that mean? So you are an artist, you get onto Audius, and now you have control of what? What is the decentralized part of ownership? And you've given some examples of what they've done with that data or that kind of just ownership of the fan base. But what are some of the other things that you unlock the possibilities of?
Yeah, I think at its root, it's really that follower graph being something that's openly consumable in other product experiences that integrate with Audius. It's also open to the artist, right? All of that data is there and available. So, what that means in more concrete terms is that you can carry that audience between different user experiences, right? So everything from, there are some artists and labels in the Audius community that are working on building their own kind of end-to-end streaming product experiences around Audius, where the same the fan base they've built up within Audius first party product could now be used in these other ways, all the way to think in like a context like ticketing. No one has done this yet, and yet is the key word there. But you could imagine if you connected as an artist your Audius account with a ticketing product, that ticketing product could actually target your fans that follow you in a given geo and say, oh, well, so-and-so is coming to play a show near you. Since you follow the artist and because you've engaged with them, you can get advance access to their tickets, right? The use cases, I think the ways that people are using that data so far are pretty early. I think this is, it's only now, not now, but more recently been possible kind of, interaction model perspective to support this kind of, sign in with Audius elsewhere or things along those lines. So to your point, I think what's really interesting here, decentralization was the enabler for all of that. Folks building around Audius, engaging on Audius can do so without fear or any kind of, doubt that our company could take away their access, right? The way that this has happened on Twitter, on Facebook, on Soundcloud, on like every other place for user generated content, right? There was at some time a permissive open API that the platforms used to grow, and then they decide to lock it down later because it serves the interests of the platform to kind of consolidate the growth that they've generated. In the case of Audius, our community would actually have to vote to lock things down. But even more so than that, because it's an open, decentralized network, our first party product has no different level of access to the network than anyone else's product. Right? Even before these more well-structured APIs and stuff existed for people to integrate with, people in the community built everything from podcast importing tools, like reverse engineering how the first-party client does upload and then replicating that in another context to watch an RSS feed and then auto-upload anything that was posted to the RSS feed to Audius, to all kinds of things along these lines. There's a YouTube importer as well that another team made. So it's now possible, I think, to do that in like a more palatable and straightforward way, but the data was always there because ultimately, because Audius is open source and fully decentralized, the interface that our product uses is no different from anyone else's. So yeah, the value prop for the artist around all of this has really been this sense that a fan on Audius is more valuable to them than a fan elsewhere. Even before monetization tooling existed on Audius, a year, 2 years ago, that was the incentive that brought people here. This idea that if I'm early here, if I help build Audius up over time, I can be established in this community in a way that will accrue value back to me in the future.
Right. I love this idea that basically now everyone can do whatever they want with the network and the data that they have. My favorite example that I've heard in another podcast was actually someone building a racing game where you'd steer the wheel to the beat of the music. That's kind of just hilarious and super creative.
That's definitely a team favorite. It's pretty cool to be able to, race a car in sync with music from like Dylan Francis, for example,
Right.
Yeah.
But it just shows the possibility of what kind of new consumer experiences can be built if you unlock the creativity of the entire world. I do want to double down on artist activity on Audius a bit more. So one is, what content are they able to upload? So I was curious about, say if you're deadmau5 and you're on Audius, you can't actually upload your entire body of work onto the platform, right? So how do you deal with this fragmentation of content? How do we have to think about the fact that there's going to be certain things that are on Audius and then there's going to be certain things that labels control?
It's a really great question. Actually, irrespective of the label aspect of things, the success cases we've seen on Audius haven't been folks replicating the catalog they have everywhere else also on Audius. It's been people uploading weird, different things that otherwise would have never seen the light of day in a formal release on one of the major DSPs to Audius, seeing their super fans get stoked about that, right? So some examples in deadmau5's case in particular, he used to upload these works in progress to SoundCloud. And then ultimately when he felt like he had a final version of the track, he would lock it in and put it on Spotify. He kind of felt disenchanted with SoundCloud and didn't like the direction things were going there. He started just uploading these to Dropbox and tweeting out Dropbox links to his fans. So it's funny, actually, Dropbox has this very janky little media player, right? So Dropbox tries its best to know what is the file type that you're sharing, and it has some little plugins that I think they can display PDFs. They can show this very janky little music player for tracks. And deadmau5's fans would, in these deadmau5 forums, collect and aggregate these Dropbox tracks and sort of listen to them and debate them and say, oh, the version from November 15th was better than the one from December 1st. And I liked this better than this. And there's really not a place anymore for that type of engagement until Audius, right? Another type of use case we've seen folks be very excited about here is there are often tracks that an artist will choose not to release because the track, even though it's mastered, finished, done, doesn't fit the broader brand direction and vibe they want to take their project in. There's only so many tracks that can go on an album, right? And they might just like the other ones better. There's still a segment of the super fan portion of their community that would love to hear those things, right?
Right.
So these are the types of content that have done really well on Audius. And that, I think, kind of ties nicely into the question you have around the label side. I think the usage model around Audius has always been one of fragmented content. Audius is not, I think, a great place to listen to your favorite hits from so-and-so artist. It's more the best place to listen to the weird longer tail of stuff that artist is experimenting with. And at the avant-garde of their work, maybe in a year or two, the influences and elements of that make it into the releases that they put out on Spotify or places like that. So from the label side, I think that's actually made things go relatively smoothly, in that generally the labels that we've spoken with see Audius as a cool way to build fan base and especially to help break some of their up and coming catalog. But because the usage model around Audius is not really one that's competing with Spotify and these other places do, kind of label community has generally been supportive of what's happening here. I think this is just kind of a new way to engage people, not too dissimilar, I think, to how the music industry has seen TikTok. We're obviously much smaller than TikTok right now, but TikTok's kind of usage and engagement model is not something that cannibalizes Spotify usage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess from a certain standpoint, there's only a finite amount of time, and the vast quantities of time that teenagers are spending on TikTok has to be coming from somewhere, right? It's not like a direct replacement of, the activity that's happening. This is something that's augmenting what already exists.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating is it's not really focused on the passive, like pure enjoyment of consuming music, but it truly gives the ability for fans to participate in that full growth and development of an artist. And you really can have that experience of, hey, I discovered this person when they just uploaded their first set on Audius, and I've been able to support them in some way throughout the entire journey. Let's talk about the listener experience or the fan experience, because it's very multifaceted on Audius. So you mentioned that actually most of the listening activity is not actually on the Audius client anymore. That's kind of mind-blowing, right? So what is the role of Audius, the music player itself? And then how have you seen fans engage elsewhere on like third-party platforms or other, applications with artists themselves?
Yeah, so we see the role of the first party client both to be kind of a reference implementation that others can fork from, borrow from. It's all open source, it's all very permissively licensed. So, we've seen people fork that client to do things as mundane as changing the color scheme and as advanced as, like import tools that I mentioned, right? People building out different workflows for ingesting content to Audius. Being a reference and the place that, whenever there are new features added at the protocol level to the network and things like that, for the developer community around Audius to be able to pattern after how the reference client consumes those things is very valuable. It was really the means by which we bootstrapped the initial user base and network effect around Audius. So if you rewind back like 2-3 years ago, when there were a few hundred artists on Audius and maybe 1,000, 2,000 fans, no developer would ever care to build here, right? There needed to be some basis of usage to make it make sense for them. Having a great first party client, I think, was the enabler for us to bootstrap that. Is that we could make this protocol have utility to users in the absence of that network effect. The initial utility to those first few artists coming on was just, hey, here's a hosting tool, like upload things here and share links out. That's it, right? Because there's no users here that we're bringing to you, but like you can at least just use this as like a better way to share your works in progress and things than uploading them to Dropbox, right? And sharing a Dropbox link. I joke about this a lot. Like the earliest competitor to Audius was really Dropbox more than anyone else, because that was like the thing that artists were using for this initial use case that we sort of built for.
Wasn't that also where the idea came from? I remember like listening somewhere that you guys were thinking of creating some sort of a decentralized Dropbox, and then it evolved to Audius.
Oh, yeah. So that's not where the idea came from, but that was, I think, where I first got interested in and excited about crypto. So I worked for this company, AeroFS, in like 2011 or so. That actually was that. It was a decentralized Dropbox. It was a really, really neat product, and it actually worked. It worked quite well, given the technical constraints there. Of course, like the engineers working on a product like that were all excited about Bitcoin, right? And that was where in 2011, like I first heard about that and started, learning about it and whatnot. But yeah, it ended up, I guess actually, yeah, in retrospect, a lot of those ideas and like the work from that time did carry into the first version of Audius like 6-7 years later. A lot of the primitives haven't changed, right? If you think about like, decentralized, like gossipy protocol type things, we have better open source tools to do a lot of those things like libp2p and whatnot, but the patterns are still the same. Is like the state of the art there hasn't really advanced a ton. The problems, solution sets available there aren't, there's really not much more novel work to be done around these types of things. But anyway, yeah, there were definitely some ideas from that era, I think, that made it into here. But kind of getting back to your question, the sort of role of the first party client in all of this is really to be that reference for others to fork from, to follow, to replicate. And then in mobile, for example, on mobile, the reference client is still the vast majority of listening. So there are also there are different frontiers. What's interesting too to see is the reference client has stayed roughly at the same percentage of usage now for about the last year or so, even as the top line usage of Audius has continued to grow. Yeah, we'll see where things end up shaking out. I think there will always be, kind of a core reference client that we direct people towards using if they're, signing up or engaging for the first time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then do you consider like growth of distribution of Audius content on other platforms like third-party solutions as part of that fan or listener count in any way? Also, a question about just the third-party developers. Is there more growth on artists and creators on Audius? Is the rate of growth for artists faster than the rate of growth for listeners just because there's a greater incentive for artists to participate more?
Oh, that's such a great question. We've actually seen the opposite, interestingly, which is that more API integrations has led to more fan engagement because there are existing audiences that are now engaging with the Audius network. And those folks are counted in the broader kind of usage numbers for the protocol. But on the artist side, I think what we've seen is because most of the integrations with the network have been directed towards listeners rather than towards artists, the artists that are using Audius predominantly use the reference client, and then a few of those tools that I mentioned for doing auto import and whatnot. Whereas the fan side, the majority are coming from this kind of network of different applications and use cases, with still quite a healthy, good portion of them coming from the reference client too. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see that. I think there are potentially types of API integrations that would lead to more artist ingress and onboarding, but what we've struggled to kind of figure out there is like the engagement model around Audius is not really conducive to the typical distributor kind of tool chain, which is like, let's pipe all this content into the thing and then, just kind of throw our hands up and do nothing, right? The artists and creators that have been successful on Audius have been the ones that treat this as a community, not like a dumping ground for music. If you just stick things here and then go away, like nothing's gonna happen, right? Like the content's not going to do well. So I think that's been the interesting kind of conundrum. In listener facing integrations are much simpler to kind of replicate functionality around than the artist integrations are, which I think is why we haven't seen, there hasn't been as much of a demand.
Interesting. Yeah, I think this leads to a more broader philosophical question of, initially centralization is really appealing because this is literally going against Spotify and their distribution models, labels having so much control of artists. But does there come to a certain point where artists or developers don't really want more novel solutions, right? They're not all trying to build their own independent fan engagement product. They're not all trying to build, their own music listening client because people actually crave a consolidation of that, or people actually crave services that are, I guess, more robust than just a random like plugin or some integration that a random developer came up with. What happens to the future of this decentralized model? Are we going to see consolidation in certain areas? Are we going to see people start to depend on actually like Web 2 non-decentralized platforms because it just works better and it just is easier? I mean, one example to draw upon is like creators still really depend on Patreon as a platform because it just kind of does what they want the fan engagement to do, especially when money is involved. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really fascinating question, especially with kind of where broadly this decentralization movement and Web3 is at. I think there's sort of a historical pendulum swinging effect back and forth between centralization and decentralization, right? This is not the first time this sort of trend has happened, right? Back in the 70s, right, going from kind of mainframe computing to personal computing to, arguably now heading back towards like effectively mainframe computing, where we're kind of re-centralizing these edge devices. But similarly, like the way the internet first developed, right, was this, kind of decentralized, chaotic place, and then consolidation happened. Similarly, like mobile as a platform, when it first came out, there was this massive proliferation of apps and user behavior around trying different apps and playing with different apps. And nowadays, like you ask people, when was the last time you installed a new app? It's probably been months, right? You have your things that serve the things that you need to do, and consumer behavior just isn't as attuned to installing new apps, right? The platform is mature in a sense, right? I think we're going to see the same patterns play out around Audius. I don't think there's anything kind of different here with respect to preventing sort of consolidation. The interesting part of that, though, that I think will play out differently, right, is those who have consolidated and aggregated kind of the largest subsets of audience within this ecosystem, their ability to have a network effect around protecting that audience in the face of them changing rules and changing things, I think will be a lot less durable than in Web 2 kind of context that was, right? Because as a user, you own your data here, you own your follower graph, you own all of these things. You can port that between different products, clients, user experiences. I don't think that ability existing will actually lead to like massive liquidity in where people are working and operating. But I think it shifts the power dynamics such that the folks in the developer side who are serving these audiences can't take for granted the fact that their users have no other choice, right? It's sort of,
right.
I don't think that that kind of trend broadly is limited just to crypto, Web3, whatever term you want to use for this movement. But like things like Substack are sort of the same, right? Like you can leave Substack and carry your email list somewhere else. Substack is a tool, right? It's a tool for utilizing data that ultimately you as a creator own. And I think that's the shift, we hope that Audius can bring to music as well, which is as a creator, you own and control that like CRM data of the fan CRM, but you can control how and what and when you plug things into that with confidence that, this commons of where those relationships live and whatnot is something that's not owned or controlled by anyone in particular.
Right. That's a great segue to governance of Audius in the entire platform. So can you tell people what the breakdown is? So there's the startup Audius as a corporate entity, and then there's actually Audius, the foundation, and all of the community contributors. So talk to us about the dynamics of the community and how it's governed.
Yeah, so the root of that kind of power dynamic comes in the form of on-chain governance. So any and all aspects of the way Audius works at the network and protocol level are controlled by and governed by the community in the form of these token holder based voting structures. So it's pretty simple, right? But from a technical perspective, like new versions of node software can't be accepted by the network until on-chain they've been added to this registry that's controlled by the governance process. Similarly, changes to the smart contract layer, changes to the inflation dynamics around the token, changes to any of these kinds of things actually have to be voted into place by the community. And there's a quorum requirement and kind of a majority requirement. So if the quorum is met and a majority of the people who vote affirmatively, then that proposal can be executed. If not, it can't. So what that leads to from the dynamics, both the corporate structuring of Audius, which is initially there was just one American company that existed to build and test the initial version of Audius. There's a foundation that actually executed launching the initial version of the network and some of the early orchestration of work that happened there. And then there's the on-chain parts of Audius that actually control what is Audius from the moment the foundation kind of pushed this thing out into the world and into existence. And then now there are quite a few other companies that exist to build in and around the Audius ecosystem specifically. That is not just building third-party applications, but working on the protocol directly and asking the foundation and the community for grants to support that work. So yeah, this is it sounds like there are a lot of moving pieces here, but what it really means is that initial American company that built the first version of Audius, as well as the other companies building around the ecosystem, some of which are in the US and some are in other parts of the world, they lobby and ask the community for support in building certain things, certain ideas. And then if there's sort of an indication of enough support, either via the governance forum or through the Discord and other places, they'll propose those things for like a formal vote. If it's a large piece of work, they'll actually propose it before the work is kicked off and say, hey, like allocate funds towards working on this. If it's a smaller piece of work, typically what will happen is they'll just do it and then they have to ask the community to like approve it being added to the network. So so that's kind of the model. Is there's sort of this open kind of roadmap and like list of things that seem like good ideas to work on, but that ultimately the community kind of has the final say in deciding on. And then ultimately, you know, myself, the other folks that help build out the initial version of Audius, we serve at the pleasure of the community. If the community ever decides or feels that we're not doing a good job, or that we are spending too much money, or whatever it is, they can defund us if they want to, right? Which is kind of wild too. Yeah.
It's so wild and it's so unique. And I really want to lean in on this because you, as the CEO of the corporation, you know, which is just one entity out of all that's on Audius platform, how do you think about your role over time? Because it feels like you play a really powerful role initially in standing up the initial platform. You know, I heard somewhere that like you actually stopped actively contributing code to, you know, I don't know what part of the platform at a certain point. And so does that shift now? Like, are you still thinking about building more products and the roadmap in a traditional way where it's like, we're going to grow the users, we want to grow the platform? Or are you almost starting to play more intermediary role between different parties and different new startups that are evolving? I'm so curious.
You know, my personal role here seems to have evolved almost like more towards politician than, you know, builder, right? I don't know how I feel about that shift yet, but I'm enjoying it so far. And it's brought a new and really interesting set of challenges with it, right? Because it's sort of, you know, I do have an idea of and kind of a sense of where I think Audius should go, but so do many other people, right? And this is a commons now, and we are all openly debating and thinking about the best ways to achieve these broadly held goals for the network, which are, you know, around creator empowerment and whatnot. So yeah, it's a really interesting kind of spot to be in. You know, I think if the Audius community continues to have confidence in the work that I do and the work that the more prominent members of the ecosystem are doing, I'll be here forever, right? So long as, you know, people still have the confidence in us to be doing things that are advancing all the things you described, right? Like growing the user base, growing the artist base, serving more artists, serving them better, making them more money. I mean, I can sit here and enumerate things forever and ever, but like all of these things, you know, there's a lot more work to do here, and we have no intention of stopping that so long as, again, the community feels that we're doing a good job with their resources and with their time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think my hope would be that this corporation and the other corporations that have started to spring up to serve different use cases and needs in Audius can exist in perpetuity at the behest of the community.
There is an interesting conversation to be had about how someone navigates their career over time, right? I'm just thinking about a software engineer or maybe a product manager that's working for Audius, the corporation right now, but maybe as Audius evolves to be more of a almost political intermediary role and body in the ecosystem, they might identify opportunities elsewhere, or they might see other problems within the platform, and then they create their own corporation on top of it, right? It's very similar to how things are like in startups, where you might be at a big company, you identify some really interesting problems, you create a startup, but now you actually get to stay in the ecosystem rather than having to leave. And there's probably a lot more malleability and movement.
Yeah,
right?
That's already happened for what it's worth. And yeah, I think that's like the coolest thing to get to see. Yeah, I should also qualify. I think like when I talk about that kind of more political aspect of the role, that's really where I think my job personally has evolved. I think most of the folks working on the corporate side have, you know, they're still continuing to do, you know, software engineering work, product work, all of the sorts of things you described. But I think it's been really, really cool to see some folks like in engineering, for example, see some of those opportunities and kind of fork off and say, oh yeah, like I'm going to run a node operator kind of business on my own. I think it's really cool. As you said, you can stay within this ecosystem because opportunity abounds right now. And those who are on the core team are in a really, really great position to garner community support for doing new things and different things.
Definitely. And what does it mean for you as a startup founder that initially owns or still owns a huge stack? Because it's very different than traditional exits and startups.
That is our goal, I would say, is to render ourselves obsolete in the process. I think that would be the most appeared like ever. I think it's not too different from, in a situation where a founder founded like a normal company and they take the company public.
Right.
You can work there like forever, right? There's no reason to like not work on it, right? If that's where you feel there are the best, opportunities to do great work in the world, like I don't see why anyone would ever want to leave, right? The thing that they help create. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe in like 30 years or whatever, we'll see folks like effectively retire, right? Because they're finishing their careers, right? And that'll be like the end of the road. But there's really not any distinct like point in time where things clearly end in the way that like if a company is acquired, it sort of does, right? Or obviously if a company shuts down or something, there is kind of a distinct endpoint. But I think what's different here is there's people at varying stages of development and progress are able to be kind of this ecosystem driven movement potentially in advance of them actually having durable usage and product market fit and all these things. I think what is more bizarre in this is what happens when these things become like kind of zombies, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately, Audius, I think, is well beyond the risk of this sort of scenario, but there are many protocol ecosystems that are kind of zombies, right? Where it's like the thing's still there, sort of, there are some people working on it, but maybe not. That lack of kind of closure on what happens when clearly these things have like failed, and that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But like, I think it's doing a disservice to everyone like ostensibly involved when the thing is sort of limping along. It's almost like a SaaS company or an enterprise company that has like 1 million or 2 million of ARR, which is like enough to be a going concern, but they can't figure out how to get to like more than that. But it's still enough that like, you don't like shut that down. So then what? You sort of like spin around as like this vaguely slightly profitable thing, but that's ultimately like not really, it's maybe not possible to ever break out of that like funk. To some extent, it's like better to force an outcome one way or another, right, than to be in that zombie state. But yeah.
I was going to ask you about how the market forces are working in the economy and what happens if the economy collapses, right? But I feel like there's a sense that now that because there's tokens associated with these communities, the transactions are much more fluid. Market forces will hopefully just regulate the outcome of different organizations, right? If it's kind of at a steady state, then it'll continue. But if it's clear that there's no more value to contributing, to putting any more work into it, then people will just leave naturally over time, especially if the currency declines and they just can't make livelihood there. I know we're out of time here. I feel like we could be going all day. This is so fascinating. My last question to you is just like, what is next, right? What do you see your role next in this ecosystem, both building and furthering Audius, but also do you play a heavy role in influencing and helping other founders define their business models, just pursuing Web3 products?
Yeah, so I think what's next for Audius as a community and ecosystem, I think coalesced around 2022 being the year of monetization tools. And there's a lot more to do there. So, sort of bringing together more opportunities both on the first party reference client and off client to kind of charge users for different offerings, different things. So that's really the focus for the next little while here. And then, for myself, I've actually been trying to keep my focus on Audius kind of first and foremost. There are a small number of kind of friends and friends of friends that I help on a recurring basis with different things, but I don't actively angel invest. I don't really engage in these things because I find it hard to balance. I guess maybe I'm a one-track mind to some extent. Like I kind of can focus for long periods of time on one thing, but not more than one. So yeah, I kind of just kept my focus on and around Audius and intend to kind of keep it there.
That's awesome. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I feel so much hope that there has been definition of how a company like Audius operates, and now there's proof that it is fully operational. So hopefully this gives inspiration to others and really gives them tangible models to also follow and put into use. But thank you so much, Roneil, for your time, and good luck on the launch of your new product in the next few weeks.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Roneil Rumberg, co-founder and CEO of Audius, the first ever open source music network. You can find him on Twitter at RoneilR, and you can check out the music on their platform at audius.co. If you like listening to this episode, please help leave a review in your podcast app of choice. As always, thank you for listening. This is your host, Annie Zhang, and I will see you in 2 weeks.